delegates. Elena Christopher, Senior Vice President here at HFS. Welcome to yet another, what we hope will be useful and insightful session. This one today is being practical about AI, and I've got a great panel discussion organized for you. A couple of quick introductory comments there. In general, we think that the whole point of any emerging technology is how we can put it to good use to actually solve real world problems and ultimately drive improvement and benefit. And in the process, we're making it fit for purpose and really accepted and used by all. When we look through the lens specifically at artificial intelligence and all of its myriad permutations, we know it holds this potential, but our observation has often been that it sort of gets stuck somewhere on the path from science project and lab to actual business value. So that's a bit about what we're going to talk about today, is to try and crack open this topic and figure out how we can really get use from AI and make it beneficial for all. So with that, let's go ahead and bring in the panelists. We'll let these guys roll in and I'll quickly introduce them. Okay, welcome everyone. So first and foremost, I'm pleased to introduce Rupinder Dhillon. Rupinder is the Chief Data Officer as well as SVP of Data and AI from the Hudson's Bay Company. We say wave Rupinder, please. There we go. Secondly, also representing the enterprise perspective, we've got Martin Caupin. Martin is the lead data scientist and head of BNP Paribas CIB, their US AI lab. Hello, Martin, and welcome. Okay, thirdly, representing the software vendor perspective, we've got Mike Hobday. Mike is the interim CEO of AntWorks. And Mike, he spent a little time at a company we may have heard of that knows a little something about AI, a firm called IBM. But pleased to have you here today, Mike. And then last but not least, we've got a guy that I know pretty HFS's very own Tom Reuner. Tom Reuner leads IT services for us, but in his varied tenure with HFS, he's also led automation and AI and has done a whole ton of research here, as well as having a multiple year sojourn when he was with the AI software company Arago in a marketing role where he got to explain AI to the world. But really pleased to have all of you guys here. So what we're going to do today, to our theme of practical AI, we're going to break this discussion up into what I think of as sort of 3 acts. And so act 1, we're going to talk about what problems can AI solve, sort of a riff on, well, what the heck is it and what can we do with it? Secondly, our big theme or act 2, if you will, what are the roadblocks to success? If we understand what our barriers are, then hopefully we can break them down. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about what does good look like? What are some examples of success? And then we'll end with some actionable recommendations. And so with that in mind, let's go with our first theme, which is all about what problems can AI solve. And I've phrased this very intentionally because I feel like sometimes, particularly with emerging tech, you sort of almost do, like I think of that movie Raising Arizona and Holly Hunter's role in it. She says, I'm going to get me a toddler. And so sometimes I feel like with many emerging tech, certainly artificial intelligence among them, there's this sort of focus on, I'm going to get me some AI. But perhaps that's the wrong way around. We want to think about what is the business purpose first. So we say, what problems can AI solve rather than I have AI and what can I do with it? But let's dive into our panelists and start to talk about this. Rupinder, I'd love to start with you and what you do at Hudson's Bay. So please tell us a little bit about what you lead, how AI fits into that, and ultimately we can keep the lens focused on just that point I made a couple of moments ago. What problems does AI help Hudson's Bay with? Over to you, Rupinder.
So first of all, great to be here, and thank you for inviting me to participate with such an amazing group of folks here. So in my group, we actually drive, I run the data innovation team. So our role is really to make sure that the organization as a whole is using data, using AI, using automation to really solve a bunch of different business problems. And similar to prior to this role, I led the AI labs team at Bell Canada here in Canada. And the thinking was really the same. It was wherever we can reframe a business problem as a prediction problem is a great AI use case or machine learning use case. I think the tendency is to automatically gravitate to, AI means a chatbot. AI means these big multi-million-dollar investment type projects. But really, it's anywhere we can, business challenges, big and small, as long as we're able to frame that business problem as a prediction problem. What that also allows us to do is make sure that every AI use case or machine learning use case is actually baked in something that the business teams are actually trying to solve, which has been very, very useful. The other thing that we've done slightly differently is we've actually our RPA team and our AI team together under the same umbrella and call that the intelligent automation team, because really automation comes in different forms, and really it's the purpose is to make the teams and our businesses more efficient in the ways that they work.
Super, thank you for that, Rupinder. I have to just make a couple of quick comments. So I love that concept of framing things as a prediction problem. And so if you can identify something as a prediction problem, and then it starts to speak to, well, what tools could we use to solve this? Secondly, I hear so much about things called intelligent automation, and promptly I ask, well, where's the intelligence? And so by virtue of coupling AI with RPA, you have actually truly made that combination. So thank you for that. Martin, let's cruise over to you. So as I mentioned, you run the AI lab for BNP Paribas in the US. Tell us a little bit more about how did this lab come into being? I'd really love for you to talk a little bit about how it interacts with the business units and the various functions. And as ever, back to that lens of what business problems are you working to solve? Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Elena, for having me. So for us, in fact, the journey started in 2017 with our CEO, Jean-Laurent Bonnafé, that gave an envelope for digital transformation of 3 billion over 3 years. And this helped, like I'd say, foster some of those new initiatives. What we saw with AI is that the field of application had tremendously evolved, increased, and then therefore could be like a business opportunities for it. So for us in Americas, we started the journeys mostly with business interviews, meaning trying to understand, and I come from a business background. I was a credit quant before, so I had a bit of knowledge of where it could be applied, and I really tried to frame and then figure out like what kind of a business problem we could tackle thanks to this emerging technology, I would say. What got us also interested into investing in AI is that a lot of businesses were approached either by startups or consulting firms that were proposing those kind of services, and they didn't always had like our businesses didn't always had the proper background or understanding of what this technology could do. Therefore, like the need of a center of expertise were really shown there. Out of Europe, like BNP Paribas being a European bank, some initiatives had already started, so the way was paved for us, like in Americas, to start this work. And now we're really organized as part of a network. Like when working on AI problems, if it's a problem big enough, then it can be like with collaboration of multiple teams, which is quite interesting. With regards to application, to be very specific, following those interviews and then I'd say getting the business understanding, we really focused on two main categories. So machine learning for decisioning, you have various parameters you want to figure out like what is the correct decision, and then as well also really combine natural language processing, which we heavily invested on early back in 2017, and then now that has really taken off.
Super, thank you for that detail. And I like you made a critical point about doing interviews with the business units as you were getting it started, and as well as doing this on an ongoing basis. It's so important to take your SMEs on the journey with you. And I also appreciate that you've done something I encourage us all to do for the remainder of this session, which is you didn't just say AI, you got specific and specifically mentioned machine learning and natural language processing. So thank you for that. Okay. Mike Hobday, I'd love to roll over to you. So you're currently helming the firm AntWorks. AntWorks is, of course, a software company offering intelligent document processing solutions. Help us understand a little bit about some of the problems that you and AntWorks are endeavoring to solve for your clients.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. It's really great to be here. And I think you mentioned my former firm, IBM, which I spent 11 years at. And latterly, I was running the automation business in Europe. And towards the end of my tenure, which is heading up towards 2 years ago, I'd been obviously working on Watson and robotic process automation, and getting a bit frustrated because my projects tended to be isolated forms of AI used in analytics, or robotic process automation, really automating reconciliation processes, and processes really which were probably bad process, and all I was doing, it felt to me, was moving data, and possibly bad data, much faster in an organization to execute transactions or put wrong data in back-end systems. So I'm being a bit kind of negative there, but there was that feeling in the early days of automation that it was automation at any cost and without consideration to the process. So what we do at AntWorks, and why I moved to AntWorks, is we look at it differently. And I've listened all day, and it's all about data. So we believe the important thing is to automate the ingestion of data into your processes, and do that so you get to near 100% accuracy in the data. And then your downstream processes shouldn't require too much reconciliation, and APIs and RPA can drive the data into your back-end systems and execute transactions for you. So that's what we're about. It's and the key differentiator for AntWorks is our ability to use our cognitive machine engines, machine reading solutions to recognize documents, to enhance them, to extract data, to enrich that data with data inside the organization, to understand with the level of confidence in the understanding of that data, and then make a decision and either trigger a transaction or put the data into your systems of record. And that makes a big change, because it's about structured and unstructured data. If you think about most organizations, and we forget that we may think we're digital, but actually we just got scanned images of documents and images and piles of emails coming to our organizations, and that's what we're there to address.
Thank you for that. I think you're right, Mike. Throughout the session, throughout the day so far, data has been just a predominant theme, and there is no AI without data. There's not a lot going on in cloud without data, and so the ability for AntWorks to try and help enterprises solve those unstructured data problems is definitely sort of at its heart, very practical AI. All right, so that was sort of Act 1, if you will, setting the stage for what are some of the problems that AI can solve. Let's go into Act 2 here, folks, and we're going to talk about what are some of the biggest roadblocks to success. I'm sure it's sort of your tales from the trenches. Everyone's got something to add to this. I can tell you in HFS research again and again and again, what we've seen so consistently about the overarching roadblock for success for almost any emerging technology, but certainly it applies to artificial intelligence as well, is unwillingness to change. It's really hard to change behaviors. You can spend a whole big bag of money on the flashiest, coolest new technology, but if no one uses it, it doesn't matter because you haven't perhaps greased the skids appropriately to encourage change. So let's talk a little bit about this. Because I think what we want to uncover is this the case for AI? So Martin, let's go to you first. How has this played out for you and within B&B? Do you agree or disagree with the statement I've just made about the biggest barrier to success being that unwillingness to change? What's your experience been?
I can tell you, it's definitely an important factor. What you want first is obviously create engagement. For that, at the very beginning of our journey, we did a lot of tech talk just to try to explain what it was about, and then try to avoid that people use AI as a keyword for something which is just commercial. There is something behind this commercial aspect, and it's a change compared to traditional technology. Again, what I'm just saying is that there is a risk of overselling the capability. We need to be very factual into what we're able to achieve in order to keep the trust of the people that we're engaging with. What we saw, obviously, that there are some people that are reluctant to change, either because they've been through a lot of transformation and then now they just don't feel like this is going to land. But we also have early adopters, and then we just took those early adopters, we supported them through their first implementation. And then because the first implementation were successes, because the job of people that were involved in those processes have materially changed, then it created, I would say, a snowball effect of people willing to get into this AI transformation. You also have to be very mindful into which business cases you are favoring, so that you're working on something which is meaningful enough, so that at the end and then when you're looking back, you have an interesting ROI. Just with, I say, broader than that, on the roadblocks to successes, things that are important in banking. When it comes to stakeholders, I would say there are probably three key categories. We should not take AI or like the machine learning component, which is the model, as a standalone and insufficient application. It's embedded in a process that we need to revamp end to end. And this has a material impact on their organization. So oftentimes we come up with a model, but we ended up like building a whole operational model around this model. We also need to engage our technology department so that the new technology that we're bringing is supported, accepted, and fits in. And then finally, my third point was ensuring, and especially because we're in a bank, that the control function supports us, or at least are able to validate the fact that we are moving in from, let's say, operational risk in case of automation towards a model risk, which is because of its statistical nature. For my team, I'd say my main risk is definitely the talent pool that we need to sustain. We need to give them like interesting work to work on, and as well, we know that our strongest competitors are tech firms or well-funded startups, because and those talents are volatile. At the same time, when we onboard them, we want to make them sensitive to the fact that the bank has a culture which is risk averse by nature. And we need to ensure that we have this risk averse, or we are risk averse with regards to data, as well as where we keep a level of innovation, or we keep a level of flexibility for innovation.
Thank you for that, Martin. I think your point about talent is certainly notable. And I also, at the start of your comments, you made, I think, a really critical point that while, yes, there may be some resistance to change, we should never assume that everyone's going to be changing at the same exact pace. There's obviously going to be peaks and troughs, different levels of maturity and such, but really insightful comments. Mike, I'd like to ping over to you. From that software vendor perspective, you're engaging with lots of different clients. Tell us a little bit about some of these barriers that you're seeing from your client base, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think in relation to using AI to read unstructured documents, there's an education process that's going on, because I'm not sure that business leaders really understand what the technology now is, the capability of the technology. So we're reading documents of between 250 and 300 pages long, and we're extracting data points. And with one client, we're looking this year to start processing 100 million pages of documents a year, and that's a massive scale. So we've got a couple of clients who are in the space where they recognise that the world's changed, and actually work that in many cases actually hasn't been undertaken by humans before, because it's always been too expensive. So, for example, reading insurance policies in legacy insurance policies and extracting the data from them all to feed into analytics solutions, it was always too expensive to get an underwriter to read those commercial insurance policies. So we're now able to do that. So there's a big picture that people need to start to understand. The technology is now available to rethink how we deal with the data inside the organization. I think it was Alison on the last call talked about, and there was a conversation about ecosystems, and she talked about the hoarding of data in organizations. Well, if you think about how we hoard wastefully. So if you're in a bank and you're taking a mortgage, for example, your customer will share lots of information about their circumstances, about their property in the mortgage application. But what actually happens when the mortgage is written is, in the systems of record, you get the customer name, the amount they owe, and their repayment program, and everything else goes into a data store. So I think educating people to understand that actually now you can strip all of that valuable data and make it available for analytics, for AI and other forms of analytics, to improve the customer experience and offer your customer new services. I think that's key. And then the second part is, we're still in a phase, it's a bit like RPA was kind of 2 years ago or 3 years ago, a lot of POCs around and people starting small. And the reality is the opportunity here is about processing large volumes of documents so choosing the right projects and ensuring that the documents are the right quality and the images are a good quality is probably really important. And I think the point that was made earlier by Rupinder about the embedding AI and intelligent document processing alongside your RPA group is really important.
Thank you for that, Mike. I think one of your points baked in there is just understanding that, like you said, something that perhaps used to be done that was always automated because it would be too expensive to directly involve the underwriters. It's now sort of that education about what actually is possible these days. So thank you for this.
Exactly.
Okay, so Tom, let's roll over to you. Something that Martin brought up is I'd like to turn it into a question to you about roadblocks. Something that you've been writing a lot about is this idea and need for collaborative, sort of cross-enterprise emerging tech. From the standpoint of AI and other emerging technologies, you sometimes have IT initiatives, and then over here you have business initiatives. Why is this a problem? And tell us maybe a little bit about your collaborative view that you hold.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks for having me. I'm thinking not so much collaboration, but I think we have, on one hand, just building what the esteemed panelists just said. I think we have to be very clear what the outcome should be. And again, it has to go beyond just narrow machine learning, getting more information around specific problems. But once we have this view, literally what problems we're trying to solve, what are the outcomes we're trying to drive, I think that's almost the important starting point. But it's all about, if you go back, and many of you know how we think around it, we talked today about the OneOffice mindset, if you like. It has to go across organizational boundaries. Automation, AI has to be able to react to change in the environment. That's where we see RPA, other technologies struggling. And I think for me, when we talk about cross-functional, literally, have the enterprise view of all of that and the enterprise drive. We see, for instance, a lot of activity around ServiceNow. It's not an obvious AI technology, but it's not literally building AI capabilities into their platform. If you look at other technologies more on the forefront of AI, TCS, Ignio, my old stomping ground, Arago, looking very differently at live, literally trying to understand context and driving that change with your organizations. That's what it's all about. So in a nutshell, literally being clear on the outcome, but also go beyond the narrow context which doesn't change. And so we have to drive change. That's inherent, if you like, in the OneOffice mindset.
Super, thank you for that, Tom. And also sort of bringing that theme back to, again, something you will have heard and will continue to hear from us throughout this event, which is more insights into the HFS OneOffice and breaking down some of those silos. All right, Rupinder, I'm going to go to you and we can close out this Act 2 around the biggest roadblocks. So in some of our prior conversations, some comments that you've stated that have made me reflect a bit have been all around how you really need to gain acceptance as well as drive accessibility. Literally, like you can't just expect people to use forms of AI if it's not part of their tool set, it's not part of their solution kit. So tell us a little bit more about this and ultimately how you can mitigate it. And that'll bridge us over into Act 3. Over to you, Rupinder.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what some of the points that have already been made about collaboration and making sure people understand what's happening. I think in any transformation, AI, let's face it, is a transformation. The challenges won't be technical as much as they will be people driven and culture driven. So there's a natural tendency to resist something that you either don't understand, or when you feel that your team or your way of working is being disrupted by an external team, as opposed to you redefining how your team works themselves. What I found it really helps and has helped mitigate this is, business teams have to be in the driver's seat or co-piloting this with you, right? So in terms of making sure, one, they're defining also, the problems that we're trying to solve here. They understand, like I said earlier, about redefining a problem as a prediction problem. They understand that translation. Your business teams are the ones should be setting, here's the measurement, here's what the metric that we're actually trying to shift and affect here, and let's come up with those metrics and measurements together, and really to make sure that those teams who are going to ultimately benefit from this are part of the discovery, a part of the learning, as well as part of the shared success when these things happen well. Really trying to create that sense of this is something that is happening with them as opposed to them, right? And I think that's been incredibly important. And I think Martin touched on this as well. An algorithm isn't what's going to drive a massive change in your organization, right? An algorithm gets you 25% of the way there, maybe even 10%. It's redefining all of your business processes to then fully leverage what that algorithm does for you. That's what's really going to drive that change. And that's not necessarily going to come from your IT team or your data science team. That's going to come from a collaboration across a lot of teams.
Fabulous. Thank you, Rupinder. We can all sort of chalk that one up as something to think about, which is the business always needs to be your co-pilot. Just great insights there. All right, so we're coming up on time, so we're going to round out Act 3 with what does good look like. This is all about, we're going to talk about how you can be successful with AI, how you can have those practical applications and what it took to achieve it. So let's do a bit of an around the virtual table, so to speak. And I'm going to ask each of you guys to each share an example of AI delivering value and what it took to achieve it. So Mike Hobday, let's start with you. Any client examples that you can share? I will gently tell you, Mike, you're on mute.
There we go. Well, you told me to go on mute, so there we go. Pet insurance. I'm going to give you that example. So client comes to us and says, we'd like to reduce costs and accelerate the speed of our payment of claims for pets. So can we use our unstructured document reading to read the invoices? So the answer is yes, we can. But what we can do is do more than accelerate the speed of processing the invoice, because we can take all of that myriad of invoices, some with handwriting too. We can strip the name of the vet, the name of the dog, the pedigree of the dog, the treatment of the dog, as well as the price. We can go to another source and find out whether the outcome for the animal was any good. So what does that mean? Well, one, we've accelerated and reduced the cost of processing the invoice. But we can now start to use that data. So we will know whether the outcome for the dog is good. So if another dog of the same breed comes along with the same problem in that area, we know which vet actually has the best outcomes and the lowest cost, so we can direct the customer to that place. But now we're collecting all of this data, we can start to feed all of that into our underwriting system and improve our pricing and improve our competitiveness in real time. So that's an example of reducing cost, but using the data extracted and its richness to drive revenue.
To drive revenue, solve problems, and get work done. Thank you for that, Mike. Rupinder, let's go over to you. Any HPC examples to share with us, please?
Yes, we have lots of examples, but maybe I'll share a real, a simple, basic one. I have 3 rules to not get trapped in pilot purgatory, where you have this never-ending POC. So the one I would talk about is just a very very applicable markdown optimization process and automation that we built. 3 rules for POCs. 1, it could be cleanly and very simply measured with no ambiguity as to how the model was performing versus status quo. We had the right skill sets, we had the right data, so we knew we'd be able to be successful in proving this was a better way of doing things. And we had a very clear path to be able to productionalize and scale it. And so especially as we were getting that early acceptance and buy-in, those 3 things were super critical, and it was one that we've been incredibly successful on.
That's awesome, Rupinder. I really like that sort of 3 very actionable, I think as you said, your rules about how to not get stuck at POCs. Because the other thing that POC stands for is piece of crap or perpetual crap. Don't get stuck there. Okay, Tom, let's go over to you. Any of those cross-functional examples you want to point to or something along those lines?
I hate to be predictable, so I have to choose something else. So I'm tempted to almost give you an example of my old stomping ground at Arago. And by looking at life just beyond machine learning, computer vision, for instance, finding ways of teaching an engine, literally teaching it the same way you would teach a kid on one hand. So literally it's all about knowledge, not just data. It's much more complex, that's one thing. But then applying that knowledge in a way which sort of can adapt to changes in a process environment. For instance, if you think about use case like IT automation, and typically good or excellent for a normal organization means to get to automation rates around 30%. So we at the time reached automation rates up to 90%. Gives you a sense then of how AI really can transform your processes. Well, almost I don't want the next step. Then you also already have the challenge if you talk to service provider who are bound by SLAs. They said, what do you mean 90%? We'd only meant to deliver 20% every year. You get the challenges as well, but at least you get a sense of the capabilities.
Super. Thank you for that, Tom. And just keeping us on time, Martin, you're going to round us out for today. Give us an example of practical AI in action and any lessons learned.
Sure. So on our side, like one of our, I guess, a large success was around transactional data, transactional processing. What we see that it was a good use case just because of the flow of information that we were producing. Around those transactional activity or payment activity, there could be a lot of controls. And we identified opportunities to remove, not remove, but replace some of those controls thanks to AI. And what it corresponds to is obviously like models, but as well like I was talking about the operating model that you have to put on top of it to ensure that consistently on an ongoing basis you have this working according to your monitoring method. What it benefits us with is definitely because of it's a high volume activity that was involving a lot of operational workload. And we made, I'd say, this process more efficient, let's say, lowering some of its cost, and therefore making it more competitive. On top of it, payments, in this case, are real time, so it adds an additional complexity, I guess, to the project, but makes it an exciting one.
Yeah, the real time is some serious achievement there. All right, folks, that is all the time that we have today. Just some of my quick takeaways back to my sort of joking comment at the top. It should never be about, I'm going to get me some AI. What we want to do is make sure that your focus is business led and that you always have that path to scale. But a big thank you to all of my panelists today. Really appreciate those actionable insights. And now everyone, go get practical. All right, that concludes our session. Thank you.
Thank you.